Welcome to EPG Pathashala. I am Ravi Korisettar, Senior Fellow, Dr. V.S. Wakankar Archaeological Research Institute in Bhopal. In this module, we will be discussing in detail how stone tools were manufactured during the Stone Age, starting from the Lower Paleolithic to end of the Neolithic period. This module is part of the paper on pre- and protohistoric cultures under the subject Indian culture. With reference to the e-text relating to the development of lithic technology, this module explains in greater detail along with demonstration the way in which stone artifacts were manufactured by human ancestors. The objectives include several of these points. First and foremost is that it is very difficult to describe precisely how man started making lithic tools. Followed by the idea of making flaking stone pieces might well have come to him due to interaction with the environment and learning through observation about happenings in the surroundings. And further, we would like to understand the development of lithic technology in the Paleolithic cultures, Lower, Middle and Upper Paleolithic. It is necessary for us to understand how stone tools were manufactured and the circumstances which led to our human ancestors to develop this particular skill to manipulate natural pieces of rock into sharp cutting tools that enabled man to procure food, because his subsistence was primarily based on ability to procure food, and that he was exposed to a competitive environment of wild predators who were much stronger than himself. So the circumstances gave rise to this particular idea that if man possesses sharp cutting tools, he will be able to scavenge adequate food that is available in the environment. Archaeological record has not been able to throw adequate evidence to be able to delineate the circumstances which led to the making of an artifact. The idea of making stone tools might have occurred to human ancestors because of the competition that he faced during the course of procurement strategies that were essential. As we know, man is weakest of all animals, and he was threatened by much larger animals to whom he could have been an easy prey. That's one reason making of stone tools became very essential in order to survive. Now, tools that were first made by man, as we know, gave him the strength and they became part and parcel of his body. Without these tools, man could not have performed any function, and that, as we know, all these stone tools, we categorize them as artifacts as opposed to nature facts. Artifacts are those objects which were made by man by employing particular techniques. Natural pieces do also have sharp cutting edges, but their availability in nature is very scarce. Therefore, to equip himself to be able to procure food as and when it is available, man had developed these skills, and that is the way man was able to now fight for his survival with the help of these tools. In order to understand the development of stone tool technology, the oldest stone tools have been categorized as Paleolithic stone tools. Paleolithic means, paleo means old, lithic means stones. So tools made by the simplest of techniques have been called Paleolithic tools. But in the archaeological record, we have a clear picture of the development of stone tools, both in terms of technique of making as well as the types of tools that were made. So on the basis of organizing different varieties of stone tools which were made with the help of simple stone tool technology can now be organized as those stone tools belonging to the earliest period, that is Lower Paleolithic, and followed by Middle Paleolithic as well as Upper Paleolithic. These three stages of stone tool categories represent the way in which stone tool technology developed, as well as the way in which human capabilities to survive in any particular environment also enhanced. So this particular combination has helped us understand how human behavior has evolved through time and how the archaeological evidence have helped us in the reconstruction of lifeways of these primitive human ancestors. Based on the presence of stone artifacts in the landscape, one can identify the existence of evidence for human presence in that particular area. Normally, Paleolithic sites are discovered on the basis of presence of stone tools that were made by them or fossil remains of human ancestors. Combined evidence of both stone tools and human ancestor fossil remains have not been known from many parts of the world. The earliest examples of stone artifacts belonging to the lower Paleolithic period have been found in Africa, along with the maker of these stone artifacts. Whereas in the Indian subcontinent, we do not have a single instance of a site where evidence of both stone artifacts as well as human remains have been found. There are sites where we have found occasionally the presence of fragments of human fossils, but they are not directly associated with stone artifacts. But it becomes easy for us if both stone artifacts and human fossil remains are found together, so that we can reconstruct both biological and cultural evolution. The cultural evolution is primarily based on the nature and extent of preservation of stone artifacts from archaeological contexts. The Paleolithic period is the longest time period in human history. In the entire human history, the Paleolithic period occupies 99% of its time. Only the 1% of time is covered by the historical period. Now, both historical and prehistoric periods are separated by a major invention that occurred in human history. The invention of writing marks the beginning of historical period. So, the period before the invention of writing is popularly referred to as prehistoric period. Now, this prehistoric period is divided into Paleolithic, Mesolithic, Neolithic and so on. Now, this Paleolithic, Mesolithic, Neolithic have this term lithic as a suffix of the terms, which means that during this period, man did not have knowledge of any other raw material but stone. Man did not have any technology that could help him to make tools and implements but stone. But the choice of stone was very, very important. And this also gives us an idea that man was intelligent enough to discover a suitable rock for making stone artifacts. Stone artifacts also give us an idea of the mental template of human ancestors who made their artifacts. When we look at the earliest stone tools, for example, hand axe or a cleaver, we get an idea that man's ability to manufacture stone tools and also attain standardization of form is visible to archaeologists. This also reflects on his ability to have a mental template of the artifact and finish the artifact the way in which he would have liked to finish the artifact. This also helps us understand the cognitive capabilities in our human ancestors. Another important observation that we have to make is that why man was capable of making stone tools. Here, archaeologists and paleoanthropologists identify human anatomical features as having played a very important role in his ability to manufacture stone tools. Anatomically, human ancestors who were bipedal were capable of making stone artifacts, because unlike all other animals who are quadrupeds, human ancestor was a biped, standing upright on his 2 feet, and his forelimbs were free to manipulate the materials in the environment. This particular capability, plus his 4 hands were capable of holding an object with sufficient grip. That ability also enabled man to manipulate things around. In addition to that, ideas such as that if he strikes one stone with another stone, it will result in a sharp edge itself was a great development in our human ancestors. So what we have to now understand in terms of development of stone tool technology is knowledge of our human ancestors about variety of rocks and minerals, their suitability for making or using that particular material for making an artifact, and his ability or skill to transform a natural piece of rock into a definite shape with a cutting edge, sharp cutting edge. The rocks that were ideally suited for making stone tools were hard rocks. Hard rocks and soft rocks can be distinguished that are available in nature. Hard rock is one which is very compact, which is fine grained, which also has a conchoidal fracture. The hardness of rocks is determined by archaeologists by using a particular 10-point scale. All those rocks which have hardness above 7 were suitable for making stone artifacts. Now, the harder the rock and the finer grained texture the rock possesses, the greater is the scope for modifying the rock in the desired manner. As I mentioned earlier, the characteristic flaking pattern which results in the formation of a conchoidal feature in the form of bulb of percussion and a negative scar on the rock are very, very important. The most popular types of rocks that were frequently used by human ancestors for making stone artifacts in the Paleolithic, particularly in the Lower Paleolithic, are flint, quartzite, basalt, chert, occasionally limestone, and granitic rocks were used. Very popular amongst human ancestors in different parts of the old world. We see that most of these early artifacts were made with the help of pebbles and cobbles of quartzite, sandstone, basalt, flint, and so on and so forth. All these rocks invariably possess a conchoidal fracture. As shown in this figure, Paleolithic tools are made on hard rocks having conchoidal fracture property like quartz, quartzite, chert, chalcedony, agate, jasper, carnelian, limestone, dolerite, basalt, etc. These rocks have varying degrees of conchoidal fracture. Amongst these, the rock type which is known as quartz has very little conchoidal fracture. Its breaking pattern is very different from the rocks like flint and quartzite and so on. Other rocks that have been mentioned in this figure like chalcedony, agate, jasper, carnelian and so on, they are cryptocrystalline silica rocks and they have a glossy texture and they do not occur in large size. They are also used for making smaller implements. These rocks become very popular among later periods in the Paleolithic times. But the earlier stone tools were largely made on quartzite, sandstone, flint, chert and so on and so forth. This figure also explains the conchoidal fracture which results in the formation of a cone on the surface of the rock which was flaked. When a hammer made of stone, bone, wood or antler hits on a stone of any size, a chip comes out of the stone. Such chips are called flakes. The figure on the right hand side gives us an idea that how many flakes have been detached from that piece of rock. We have series of negative depressions which are called flake scars, and then from each of these flake scars a flake of that particular size defined by the flake scar was detached. So the one which has large number of flake scars is called a core from which flakes were detached, and the flakes which came off from the core was later subjected to modification for developing a cutting tool. When this process is repeated several times, we get more flakes and a number of negative scars on the surface of the stone. Such piece with negative scars is called core. If flake is elongated such that its length is twice its breadth or more, and if lateral sides are nearly parallel and has at least one ridge on the dorsal face it is then a true blade. Now we are trying to explain how a flake can be defined. If the flake is amorphous, we would like to call it a flake. If the flake is well defined in terms of length, breadth and thickness, with a precondition that its sides are parallel, we call it a blade. But the technique of detaching flakes and detaching blades were certainly different from one another. So the core and the size of the core, the raw material that was selected for a core also play a very important role. In addition to that, hammers that were used, whether it is a stone hammer, a bone hammer or an antler hammer or a wooden hammer, these hammers also played an important role in regulating the amount of force while the core was subject to percussion by the stone tool maker. Now, in order to understand whether a particular piece of stone was man-made or a natural piece, we'll have to examine these pieces from the perspective of certain criteria developed by specialists in the understanding of stone tool technology. This particular illustration gives us a clear picture of the nature and characteristics of a piece of stone. For example, let us call it a flake. Now this flake, if it has formed as a result of human activity, we'll have to find these features: point of percussion, bulb of percussion, radial fissures, and a scar which existed earlier or a scar which resulted as a result of percussion, ripples, radial fissures, and two surfaces. One is a dorsal surface, another is a ventral surface. Now, point of percussion is the point on the upper end of the flake where directly a stone was hit on the surface of the core. Bulb of percussion. Bulb of percussion is a feature on the flake, in ventral surface of the flake, where we see a bulge right below the point where the percussion was made. Now this bulb clearly defines the fact that the raw material did possess the conchoidal fracture. Now the bulb is also characterized by the presence of a small scar on its surface, and this is called bulbar scar. Now these 3 points help us in determining the fact whether it was a result of human percussion activity. Now further below the bulb of percussion, on the ventral surface you see semicircular features, lines, and these lines are called ripple marks. Further down if you go, you also see these ripples going in a radial manner, and these are called radial fissures. And further down you have the tip end or the bottom end of the flake. And then when you turn the face of the flake upwards, what will you see is the dorsal surface. Dorsal surface is distinguished from the ventral surface by the presence of cortex or the skin of the rock, which was not subject to flaking activity. So on the dorsal surface, it is otherwise the exterior surface of the flake. You may have 1 or 2 flake scars, but the major part of this surface is left with unworked area, and that is why a flake will have 2 surfaces with distinguishing features, the ventral surface and the dorsal surface. When one comes across flakes in the landscape, they can be identified by whether it was a man-made flake or a natural flake by examining these aspects of on that particular piece. In this illustration, we are looking at 2 aspects of stone tool manufacturing activity. So when we are discussing on the manner in which flakes were detached, we use the term percussion. Percussion is act of hitting one stone on the other stone. So the one which is used for hitting is called a hammer, and the other which is being hit is called a core. Now flake is detached only when you have a flat surface on the core area. Now this flat surface, if it is naturally not there on the core, artificially a flat surface is preserved. Now this particular surface is called striking platform. That is the point where the percussion occurs, and that results in transmitting the force into the body of the rock, and that further results in the detachment of a piece of rock which we have called a flake. Now, flake also have certain characteristics other than what we have described previously. The flake has its own length, breadth, thickness, and this also helps us determine the axis. The axis, long axis and short axis are two important dimensions of a flake. Now, from the point of percussion to the end of the flake, which gets detached from the core, we will have the long axis. And then it has its own shape with sides. The sides may be parallel or unparalleled to each other. But the widest part of this particular flake helps us identify the short axis. So, long axis and short axis are perpendicular to each other. Now, these flakes are sometimes very large and sometimes very, very small, depending upon the requirement for which the flakes were detached. So, flakes that were very, very large were later modified into large cutting tools, and flakes which were very, very small were later modified into various types of scrapers and borers and points and so on. So, I said the flakes will be subject to modification. Modification in terms of achieving a particular form to perform a particular function. A large flake gets modified all over the dorsal surface, which means the cortex part of the rock will be completely removed, and as a result of this, that dorsal surface will have numerous flake scars, and then the sides will be equally modified in order to achieve a sharp cutting edge, and a larger flake will have a long cutting edge, and these are called long cutting edge artifacts, and it will have a point and a butt. Butt end generally facilitates holding the artifact. The tip end generally facilitates the function that it has to perform. In addition to that, the long sharp edges that we see along the sides of this particular flake will also be useful in cutting activity. If the flake is slender, narrow, elongated, or if it is amorphous, even then it will have sides. Now, the sides are subject to modification by a technique what we call secondary retouch. Now, this secondary retouch is focused on the sides, and that results in sharpening a flake tool so that it can be subject to a variety of functions. Now, when the sides are modified, we identify these flakes as scrapers. If only the point is modified, then we identify this as a point. And if we have deep negative scars on the side of a flake, we call it a notch. As I mentioned, you have this flaking technique, which is secondary flaking, that can be performed on both sides of the flake. It can be on the dorsal side as well as the ventral side. So, such modifications also help in making longer use of the flake as a tool to perform certain functions. So, we have secondary modification is generally referred to as retouching. Retouching means that if the sides which were sharp in the early stages, if they are blunted because of use, can be modified further to rejuvenate the sharpness of the sides of the artifact. Stone tool manufacturing activity is generally referred to as flint knapping. Now, in modern archaeology, stone tool technology is very well understood because of ability to replicate the stone tools that occur in archaeological context. Archaeologists identify raw materials which were used by the people that occur in the archaeological context, and then try to replicate these kind of tools. As a result of these experiments, it has now been possible to very convincingly describe various stages involved in the making of an artifact. Now these stages, when they are discussed in the literature, they come under the topic called understanding the processing sequence, which means that identifying the source of raw material, transporting the raw material to the place of workshop, modifying the raw material into a desired shape and size, and then putting that particular artifact to use. So understanding processing sequences becomes an important aspect of archaeological reconstruction to be able to understand the manner in which humans were capable of adapting to a particular environment. Now this particular study of artifact manufacturing stages as well as the function for which those artifacts were made helps us also in understanding the behavior of our human ancestors. That is why stone artifacts are an important source of information about our past. Lithic technology, like other crafts, is a combination of two factors. The first is the method, the use of the mind, and the second is the technique, the use of the hand. There are two basic techniques, percussion and pressure, to get flakes or blades from stone cores. In the percussion technique, either the object or the hammer is in motion, and in the pressure technique, neither is in the motion. Fabricators also play a very important role in the production of stone tools. The objects which help in detaching flakes or blades are fabricators, or in other words, simple hammers. And there are varieties of hammers which can be categorized as hard hammers, medium hammers, soft hammers, and so on and so forth. Hard hammers could be of stone. Soft hammers or light hammers could be of stone as well as bone and wood. In addition to that, as we see in the archaeological record, at a later stage, the use of punch technique or indirect percussion also becomes common. This particular punch technique became popular when it was necessary for human ancestor to consistently produce blade tools. A blade has already been defined. It has to be thin, elongated, and parallel sided. This illustration now clearly demonstrates how percussion technique was employed by human ancestors to make simple artifacts. We have direct percussion and then indirect percussion. In direct percussion, we also have two possible methods of modifying the natural piece of rock. So in direct percussion, we can hit one stone with another stone held in hand, and otherwise one stone can be hit onto another stone which serves as an anvil. And then percussion also can be carried out with the help of softer hammer stones, which are also held in hand. This particular slide demonstrates how the percussion in terms of block on block technique takes place. This is another example of percussion technique, but it is called bipolar technique because of the manner in which the flakes are detached from the core and the hammer. This illustration refers to indirect percussion or the use of punch. As I mentioned earlier, this particular technique became very popular amongst the Upper Paleolithic human ancestors. Here, the illustration clearly depicts how soft hammer of an antler and a stone hammer was put to use to detach parallel sided elongated flakes, which came to be designated blades. So we have the core held in between feet, and then a punch, which may be a sharp stone or even an antler with a pointed sharp tip, which could be used as a punch, and then a hammer. So this enabled your human ancestor to detach elongated parallel sided flakes, which we commonly refer to them as blades. Indirect percussion was carried out with the help of a punch, but with the help of a long pointed stick, Man also could detach parallel-sided flakes by applying pressure. Now this technique is called pressure technique, and this particular slide gives you an idea how the pressure technique was employed by human ancestors to detach similar blade flakes. And then these flakes or blades were subject to secondary retouch as shown in the slide on the left hand corner. In the archaeological record, the oldest stone tools are simple artifacts called choppers and chopping tools. Now these were made from pebbles, pebble grade stone tools, pebble grade raw material of quartz or quartzite, sandstone or flint or any such material. Here the pebbles were subject to direct percussion with the help of a hammer that resulted in the formation of a sharp edge which was functional. Further development in the manner in which flakes were detached takes place little later in time when the cores were prepared to detach a flake of a particular size and thickness. Now this particular technique implies greater skill in the way in which stone artifacts were detached, stone flakes were detached. And this particular technique is called Levallois technique. We see this particular technique developing late in the lower Paleolithic and then becoming a very commonplace in the middle Paleolithic times. Now this illustration also clearly describes the manner in which a flake of a desired shape and size was produced by employing Levallois technique. Yet another method of flaking or removing flakes was what we call discoidal core technique or Mousterian technique. Now this is very commonly seen in the Middle Paleolithic period when most of the stone artifacts were made on flake tools. So here a spheroidal or discoidal core was subject to flaking all around the perimeter of the core, and that resulted in the formation of negative flake scars on the surface of the core. Now this technique is called Mousterian or discoidal core technique that was very common in the Middle Paleolithic period. Now further upwards in time we come across yet another technique of detaching flakes, but then these flakes were consistently blades, and the technique used was fluted core technology. A cylindrical core was subject to removal of flakes from all around the particular piece, and that resulted in the formation of parallel scars, elongated scars along the outer surface of the core, and that is why this is referred to as fluted core technology. Later on the blades were subjected to backing and so on and so forth, one edge with sharpness, another edge deliberately blunted, and such blades were called backed blades. This slide demonstrates how parallel-sided flakes were detached by using fluted core technology. Against this background, I would like to conclude by making the statement that there is a primacy of typology over technology. The study of Paleolithic industries had demonstrated that for their understanding, typology has greater importance than the technique of manufacture of artifacts, which is not to say, however, that the latter aspect is without significance or interest, but it is appropriate to remember that in prehistoric times, just as today, technique is only a means, while the tool defined by its morphology and function is the end. This statement was made by an eminent Paleolithic archaeology of France by name Francois Bauds. Reductive process involves primarily lithic technology as a reductive process. Unlike other prehistoric technologies such as pottery production or house construction, here a raw material is reduced to a particular form that was required by the stone artifact maker. And why do we witness so much change in the lithic technology, and what were its consequences and impact on social, economic and cultural life? In summary, I would like to emphasize that understanding stone tool technology and typology is critical to reconstructing behavioral and cultural evolution of mankind. And stone artifacts represent an important body of information about human behavior in the past, and how stone tool technology can be useful in understanding the, the, the need for generating distinctive types of artifacts in distinctive environments. Overall, there are certain basic facts about stone tool technology which are common to artifacts which were produced at different points of time in different places. So, stone artifacts are as important as any other artifacts which were made by human ancestors. But the abundance of stone artifacts in all cultural periods has given us a confidence in our effort to understand how human biocultural evolution took place in the Paleolithic period. Thank you.